Hi, everybody. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. This is the second Lunch and Learn that we've done virtually. I wish that you could be here with us, but you know the room well. This is where we all gather on Wednesdays at noon to talk about the upcoming concert. And today, we're so lucky. We're joined by Claire Hunagci, our soloist, our piano soloist for the week. Welcome to West Michigan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Very happy to meet you all virtually.
Claire is going to be the soloist for the main event of our Friday evening concert, and then she has her own full concert that she's going to be performing in here, and you'll get to see it on Saturday evening. On Friday, the concert begins with a concerto, a Brandenburg concerto by Bach that does not use piano, although it does use a harpsichord. It's very interesting. The Brandenburg concertos were written by Bach for the Margrave of Brandenburg. That's why they have that name. Can you believe it? The concerto was named after the guy who paid for it. This is your chance to become immortal, folks. Think about it. Because at the West Michigan Symphony, we would certainly love it if you'd like to sponsor the creation of an entire piece of music. Well, that's what the Margrave of Brandenburg did. He sponsored these 6 concertos. And you know, back in the Baroque, especially around the time of Bach, when he wrote something, he didn't expect to ever see it or hear it again. If it was performed, very often that was it, that was the event, and then he wrote all new music for the next event, which might explain his output. Apparently, if you tried to even just write down everything that Bach wrote in his lifetime, it would take about 70 years to do. But luckily, he had 20 children that he knew of to help him with that writing down of his pieces. The third Brandenburg concerto is unique among the Brandenburgs in that it calls for 11 different players, each of which has a different part. There are 3 violins, 3 solo violins, 3 solo violas, 3 solo cellos, a solo bass, and a harpsichord. And it's really fun how they're able to play off of each other. And one of the things I think you'll enjoy about the piece is that we are experimenting with having our 11 virtuosos play it, are you ready for this? Without a conductor, without me. So I've been heavily involved in the rehearsals, but in the performance you'll see them do it on their own as it really should be done. It's a chamber piece. So that's Bach's Brandenburg Concerto number 3. Then we have a nice tidbit in between. It's a piece that actually has more than one name. It's called Symphonia or Symphony in G major. It's also called the Overture to the Anonymous Lover, L'Amant Anonyme, by Joseph Bologna, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, wonderful composer of the classical period, so later than the Baroque, right around the time of Mozart. In fact, he and Mozart knew each other and might have even shared lodgings in a big hall for the time that Mozart was in Paris. It's very possible. Joseph Bologna Chevalier de Saint-Georges was born in Guadeloupe, but as is still the case with French colonies, when you're born in Guadeloupe, you are French. You are actually a French citizen, and it wasn't long before he moved to Paris. He actually distinguished himself as a swordsman, and that's how he got the name Chevalier de Saint-Georges, Chevalier, cavalier, swordsman. But he was a spectacularly good violinist, and among other things, we think he might have been the one who inspired Mozart to write his Sinfonia Concertante for violin solo, viola solo, and orchestra, because he himself, before Mozart, did the exact same thing, and as far as we know, that had not been done before. So he was the inspiration for Mozart, we think. This is a sprightly overture, and I've already talked about it for as long as the piece goes, so I'll let you enjoy it on the day. But the overture to L'Amant Anonyme bears all of the hallmarks of the classic period. It has a first theme and a second theme and a little development section and so on. It's in sonata form. And it's a delicious piece, so I hope you enjoy that. But then we get to the main event. The main event being the Emperor Concerto. I will share that the Emperor Piano Concerto, Beethoven's Fifth, was the second piece that I ever conducted in my life, back in my senior year of college in one of the residential college dining halls at Yale. This was way back before any of you were born. It was a great time. We put a little orchestra together, and in fact, that little orchestra still exists, and I'm very proud of that. It's still going decades later, performing the Emperor Concerto. Luckily, this time, we got a real soloist. We got Claire Hunagci. Claire, tell us a little bit about yourself, because you have an interesting history to this point.
Yes, maybe. Well, I was born in the U.S. I was born in Rochester, New York, but I moved to the vicinity of Philadelphia already when I was 1 year old, so I'm really not much of a Rochester native. And that's where I grew up, that's where I studied music, and since Curtis Institute was right next door, quite literally, I was going to the student recitals at a very young age to watch the other great musicians. And then when I got in, I was 13 years old, and I studied there for 4 years. And this was probably the turning point when I really realized that I want to play music for the rest of my life. Before that, I was, in regular elementary school, middle school, and wanting to do what other kids did. But in Curtis, I really came into contact with some fantastic musicians who were my age, but had already made up their choice to be a professional musician from like the tender age of 6 or 7. So we were a bit different. And I was surrounded really by musicians who were practicing also like 6-7 hours a day. And so it took me a long time to.
Just say here two things. First of all, for those who may not know, Curtis is probably the premier conservatory in this country. It's very small. They make a point of having just one orchestra's worth of people, so they don't have thousands and thousands of people at a time studying there. But it's amazing. I would think that even as a Philly resident, that doesn't make it any easier to get into Curtis. So congratulations. But the other thing I was going to say is that what Claire is pointing out is something about musicians that you should know. That these musicians, and this goes for all the musicians you see and hear on our stage, they've been studying probably their craft from the age of 3 or 4. So they have actually more training than any doctor or lawyer or anything you can imagine. The only other thing I can think of that might be sort of like that could be ballet for girls, but because boys never start that young. But anyway, the musicians sometimes start as early as, 3 years old or something like that?
Well, when you're born in China.
Which
luckily I wasn't. So I started late. I started at 7. But yeah, I mean, in Asia, I was making kind of a joke.
Listen to that. I started late. I started at 7.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's still, you still have flexible enough hands
Yeah,
and everything to do what
yeah.
you need.
Wasn't too late yet. But I definitely will say
It's never too late. Let me just interrupt. It's never too late to start. But the thing is that if you start young enough, when your fingers are very flexible, you can get the dexterity, then you can be at the very highest level.
Yeah, that's a good point. Basically, I think like being a musician also, it's such a full-time job. I at least feel a bit guilty on the days where I don't touch the piano. And I think for most other professions, you're able to like have a 2-week break. And of course, for music, you can do that too, but you'll feel it. When you come back, after, for me, even just a couple of days of not practicing, you do feel it in your hands. It's like being an athlete, and it's very sensitive because like these muscles, I mean, the smallest things will affect them.
But at the same time, I would think you don't want to overdo it, right? Because
No.
you could really injure yourself if you do.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't practice more than 3 hours a day. And when I was in Curtis Institute, I was studying with Eleanor Sokolov and Gary Grafman. And Gary Grafman was also the teacher of Lung Long, Yu Zhou Wang, some of these big names. And he actually had focal dystonia later in his life. He was a real fantastic performer before. And so he always gave us the best rules for warm-up and how to properly exercise and how to go about planning your practice sessions. And I think it was so great that I had that because up to now, I mean, knock on wood, I've never had a kind of muscle or, pain-related injury.
Oh, that's beautiful. And Gary Grafman was also the head of Curtis, wasn't he, for a while?
He was.
Yeah.
He was. When I was there, he was still the president.
He was still
That's
the
right.
president, right?
Yeah.
So now, after Curtis, and after being in Philly for a while, your career took an interesting turn.
Yeah. I wanted to do something a little different. I graduated from high school. My parents, none of them are musicians, and they wanted me to become a doctor. That's kind of like an ambition of an Asian parent. And at the time, for me, I'm not one of those, child prodigies who can do everything. There are those who play music, and then they can also get like top grades in school, and then end up going to college and doing some major for biochemistry. I don't know, but I couldn't do that, and it was quite clear in the end that I had to choose a path, either going down the regular college path, studying science and math, or doing music. And at that time, I remember thinking, oh, music is easier. So I don't know what I was thinking, but I really thought, like, yeah, it's easier for me to play the piano than to solve this calculus equation. I mean, this was what I meant by easier. And then I decided, most of my friends were going to colleges across the country, and I was like, I want to also move away from home, so I decided to move across the ocean.
Move where there aren't people trying to get you to be a doctor.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
And luckily, I had a master class with a teacher in Japan, of all places. I was at a competition, and there was one of the jury members. His name was Professor Ari Vardi, and he taught in Hanover Music School, which is one of the really good universities for music in Germany. And he was also one of those premier professor names, which you know. And he invited me to join his class, and it took a lot of convincing, but I managed to leave and move to Germany alone without one of my parents, which, thank God.
Amazing.
And then I've been living there actually since 2007, while of course coming in and out of the States every year to visit or once in a while to play, but that became my home. Yeah, and I'm still living in Germany today.
Still living in Germany today.
Yes, that's right.
And you came
I came here from Germany, that's right.
from Germany for this.
Yes, actually, I'm so happy. Just want to say it. I had concerts planned in the U.S. for this season, but this is my only concert that takes place for all of you. So it's a great pleasure, and to celebrate Beethoven's birthday, I mean, can't be better.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing throughout this entire week, right? Beethoven's birthday. And you were saying that in Germany they decided that Beethoven's birthday is going to last another year.
Yes, Germans, they take it very seriously. And I can say this 2020 year was being planned already 3 years ago. There were different commissions being created, and the orchestras were being engaged to tour all over many years ago. And so we all knew this was a big thing. So when the pandemic came on in March, I mean, I think in the beginning of the year, everyone was saying, oh, we're going to be so sick of listening to Beethoven by the end of this year. And unfortunately, this year, we haven't had the chance to listen to a lot of live
We're
music.
so sick of not listening to Beethoven at this point. Yeah.
And they officially, I think they made this announcement already in the summer. They said that the Beethoven year is prolonged, and it will go on till the end of 2021. So whatever hasn't taken place this year, we're moving it to next year.
Now, that would be so that you could play something like the Beethoven Emperor Concerto with a full orchestra, including flutes and oboes and clarinets and bassoons and horns and trumpets, all of which, as you know, give out air, and you cannot play them with masks. The way that we're doing it on our stage, when we play the Emperor Concerto, we have been, well, necessity is the mother of invention, and we've been very inventive. We found an arrangement of the Beethoven Emperor Concerto that leaves the piano solo the same. But instead of full orchestra, the arrangement is for a string quintet. And what we did is we took the string quintet part, we gave it to the whole string orchestra, and then we're adding back the timpani, because the timpani are so all-important. And so that's what you're going to see and hear on the stage with us. And we were remarking last night, all love to our horns and to our flutes, but still how amazingly well this arrangement does to capture the full feeling of the Emperor Concerto. And that it makes me sad that we can't have our winds, and I can't wait until we do. But in this way, we've been able to be inventive, whereas Germany has put it off for another year. We're still doing the Emperor Concerto. So let's talk about this piece. It's called The Emperor. Almost all the pieces I know by Beethoven that are in the key of E flat have some kind of noble aspect to them. The Eroica Symphony is the one that comes to mind, right? The heroic symphony, written about a great hero, originally Napoleon, but anyway, it's noble. And the same is true of the Emperor. Is there anything you can tell us about your conception of the piece that has to do with that? Or, yeah.
Well, I really learned the Beethoven concertos more or less chronologically. So Emperor was the last one that I learned. And Beethoven.
And it is the last of the 5
It is the
concertos.
last of the 5, yes. And I think it's quite clear it is the biggest in terms of scale, in terms of composition scale, and also in terms of orchestration. It has this regal air, like you mentioned, Scott, and one can hear that he has reached this real musical maturity. There's no more like exploring. I mean, I think all of his concertos are fantastic, but this one, it's just every note you feel like it is put down in ink. He doesn't have to rewrite anything. And I think this one, of course, just the very beginning, it's one of those pieces which everybody would recognize immediately.
Do you want to show us a little bit of that?
Oh, sure.
Of the beginning?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a long tradition in concerto history, especially in the classic period and early Romantic, where the concerto begins with a long exposition by the orchestra before the soloist comes in, and the soloist is just sitting there. Well, in the 5th concerto, the orchestra barely gets out one note before the the soloist goes on a flight of fancy, and there are 3 chords: the tonic, which is E flat, the subdominant, which is A flat, the dominant, which is B flat, and then when we get back to E flat, that's when the orchestra plays its very long exposition. But show us these arpeggios that embellish each of those 3 chords at the beginning. So each of those has an embellishment like that, and it's like saying from the very beginning, "Look at me! Look at the soloist."
I was just thinking it's a little bit like the orchestra plays, and the piano kind of interrupts, like, "It's me, it's my turn."
It's all about me, and it's really Beethoven saying that. It's Beethoven saying that.
Yeah.
Now, in his defense, what he was really saying is, this is the triumph of the attempted triumph of the individual over the forces of fate that are trying to ruin his life. That was the theme of so much of Beethoven's music. That's where you hear fate knocking on the door in the 5th Symphony and so on. But in the Emperor Concerto, maybe he's triumphed at this point. Maybe he's.
I think so. I think so. I mean, this was a little bit later where it's already clear that he has accepted his condition where he's not able to hear, and I think his Beethoven Concerto number 4 was it's already reaching this kind of positive nature. He's not angry anymore. He's accepted it. But this one is just really full of this determination, and I am still who I am. It doesn't change anything. And one can hear only positive feelings and hope. And I think that's also then really fitting very well in today's atmosphere.
Yeah. To have hope. I mean, if you think about Beethoven's time, this was not a time of everything's great in society. It was a time of struggle. It was a time of war. A time of Napoleon and his battles and so on. A time of boundaries shifting. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then what was Austria, what became Hungary, and all of these things. So in the midst of that, people were living with trouble at that time. In the midst of that, he comes out with this assertion: "I am an artist. This is me." Let's look at the second movement a little bit. Maybe you can give us just a little bit of the second movement. At the very beginning, we're holding a chord, and then over that you play just this incredible suspended, well, I don't need to describe it. Here it is. then the orchestra comes in from there. It's just so lovely and so beautiful. And by the way, the second movement begins with only strings anyway. So what you're going to hear when we play is exactly as you would hear it in a full orchestra version. There are some woodwind solos in the second movement that are taken over by solo strings, and I think it's really quite beautiful. And the strings are doing their best to imitate the sounds of the instruments that they're playing in this version, playing like an actor plays, I mean. Now, from the suspended and very peaceful second movement, there's a really interesting shift where Beethoven is holding just a solo B natural, I think, at the very end. And then, you know, the classical composers made a big deal about how they would modulate from one key to another. It was a big deal. You had to go through a series of steps, and you go from, you know, from the 1 chord to the 6 to the 4 to the 2 to the 5, maybe a Neapolitan or something like that. But there were rules of modulation to get to a different chord. So here he is on B major, which is as far as you can get practically from E flat major, the key of the piece in which you know the third movement is going to play. So he's suspended on a B natural, and what does he do? He just goes down a half step. And it's so cute. It's like he's holding, I mean, cute maybe isn't the word. It's stunning. If you're someone who studies music theory, it's amazing. But when you listen to it, it just seems, and from that B flat now, that's the dominant of E flat major, we're back in the home key. The third movement is a rondo.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can play a little bit of the rondo theme for us? It's not easy. Yeah, and you see, I was like headbanging. This is headbanging music. It's dance.
It is. It's actually like all these syncopations, it almost like gives the idea like going off a little bit on the beats, and it makes you want to move. I mean, you have to move to play it.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to move to play it, and it really makes me move to listen to it, and of course to conduct it. And so this theme comes back several times,
Yeah.
always with little flights of fancy in the middle that the pianist gets to go off and explore different keys and explore different moods.
Yeah.
And then we're always back to this rondo theme, which is joyous, and it ends with a great burst of joy.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about the Emperor Concerto?
Well, I think I can mention that for me, it's been very interesting to see differences when I moved to Germany versus my studies here in the US. And I've been to my share of competitions in the past. And I've attended like Clyburn, Chopin, well, those are the big ones. And well, it's very clear that most competitions you play Prokofiev or Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, one of these really virtuosic pieces. And this is very virtuosic, but it's not exactly the same level. It just doesn't have enough notes to match those.
It doesn't, well, what you're saying is it doesn't have enough notes for a jury in a competition to say, this person's going to win the competition because they can play the most notes within a given second.
Yeah. So I remember when I was in Germany, I took part in a German competition. It was 2011 or so, and I was playing Chopin Concerto. And then someone was playing Beethoven 5, and I was thinking, oh, nice, yeah? But that cannot win because I thought in my young age that's easy compared to, you know, someone else was playing Rachmaninoff 3, and I thought, he will win, and my Chopin 1 is still harder than Beethoven. So in the end, he won overwhelmingly, and I was shocked. Also, it wasn't just like the jury's decision, but it was also the audience. The way they supported their music, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You know, you hear the end of Rachmaninoff 3 with the orchestra just going full blast, and the audience was like, oh, okay, thank you. And then you heard this one, it was like a rock concert. And that actually, it changed my perspective completely. And it's not because of that now that I like Beethoven anymore, but I do see now just the depth of the music, and less sometimes is simply more. And just like the second movement, what you can say with this descending scale, it's, if you look at the score, it's like, oh, this is very easy, it's just a scale. But every nuance, every touch, I mean, you can really do so much with it. And yeah, it's now become one of my favorites.
Wow. Well, you know, if I've learned two things from that story, one of them is for all those out there of you who are preparing for a competition, and I know it's many of you,
That's right.
always play the music of the country that the competition is held in.
Absolutely.
Unless you're in America, in which case play Rachmaninoff.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah.
And then second thing is that, you know, even though other composers may have more notes per square inch than Beethoven, there's really no composer who's more intense than Beethoven.
No.
And when Beethoven is excited, well, he's always excited, but when he's happy, he's incredibly happy. When he's angry, he's incredibly angry. You feel these, notched up to 10.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why we love Beethoven so much and why we're celebrating his 250th birthday this year, which is a huge deal. He was born in 1770, so 2020 is 250 years.
And we're very close. I mean, his baptizing date was like December, so we're like as close as
We're as
we
close
can
as
get.
we can get
Yeah.
within our concert schedule. And I think it's wonderful that you are then devoting your Saturday concert here at the Block to Beethoven. So tell us just a little bit about the two pieces I think you're going to
Yes.
play. Yeah?
I decided, yes, to continue with this whole Beethoven saga this year here in Muskegon. And I will be performing first the Beethoven Waldstein Sonata, which is also one of those rare pieces where there's a title. So there's Beethoven Emperor. Beethoven Waldstein was written for one of his patrons, Count Waldstein, actually. And this sonata, for me, represents, let's say, the shift from early Beethoven to, let's say, middle Beethoven. This is where everything is different. He is experimenting, the whole form of the sonata changes. The second and third movement are connected. The second movement is almost like a fantasy. And the third is in a rondo, but also with like these incredible intermezzos in between. He does such interesting technical things, composition-wise, too.
Is there anything at all from the Waldstein that you'd like to demonstrate for us?
Well, I can try. I can attempt to play the beginning, which is technically extremely difficult. And Waldstein also has another nickname. It's also known as the Aurora Sonata, which is seen then as like sunrise. And I'll try my best to illustrate that.
I remember the first time I heard this, and I was probably still in my teens, and I was just taken by the very beginning of the sonata. You can show us that. So there, you see all those repeated notes, and that's the theme. I mean, usually the first theme comes at the beginning of a piece in sonata form, and this theme is bop, 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 bop. So that's 14 times the same note before it changes. It's quite amazing.
It's really revolutionary. And also, this is one of those pieces where, as a pianist, just from the playing part, you need to be ready. You need to go up there, and when you miss a note, because these are little chords, if there's one note that's a little softer or a little stronger than the others and your hands are not 100% steady, you can hear it. Anybody can hear it. It will sound like, oh, something, it's a little shaky. And this has to be one of those pieces, like it's motoric. And there's a drive which you just can't deny.
Yeah, and that drive goes really all the way through that first movement.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in the third movement.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Three-movement sonata, similar to the three-movement concerto. It's an oversimplification
Actually,
to
very
say.
similar. They even connect. Like this one, and you were talking about like the harmonic shifts. This Waldstein has something very similar, and even I just played like from C major to B flat major. I mean, he's really experimenting. It's incredible, and they stem also like not too far from each other, just composition time-wise.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's an oversimplification to say that sonatas or concertos are fast, slow, fast.
Yeah.
But that is the case.
Most of the time, yes.
In both this sonata and in the Emperor Concerto.
Yeah.
And then you're playing another piece that I think is fascinating. Tell us about that.
Yes, I am going to be playing the Liszt transcription of Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. And I will have a little story about this because during the lockdown, I came home to my father's place in Philadelphia, and the beginning of March. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have a 1-month break. And my sister came home too, and suddenly we were living our summer holiday times. Dad cooks, dad cleans, and 2 girls do nothing. And and then during that time, it became clear that it's going to be more than a month. And I thought to myself, I need to learn some pieces. I need to do something which I ordinarily used to think I wouldn't have time to do. And this was one of those pieces, the Pastoral Symphony, because it's my favorite symphony, and probably that has something to do with the fact that I'm a huge Disney fan, and as a kid, I was just watching Fantasia all the time. So
yeah, almost the entire symphony, I think, in somewhat abridged form,
Yes.
is in Fantasia, the original
Exactly.
Fantasia.
Exactly.
Is that the one with the centaurs? and the-
Exactly. There you go. There you
yeah.
go. And even when I'm playing it, I have it in my head. These centaurs, like Zeus throwing thunderbolts down during the storm at the god of wine and everything. And basically, it took me months to really get this, just to get it in my fingers, because Liszt, he somehow crammed all those voices, all those notes from the symphony into 2 hands. And for once, I mean, Liszt is very known as one of those flamboyant virtuosos. He was an extravagant concert pianist. And actually, these compositions, I feel like they're more of a study. They're more of a monument to the symphonies themselves, because he didn't add any note that didn't belong in the symphony, which makes them very unique in his opus.
Right, because Franz Liszt, being the concert virtuoso, if there's anyone who's going to add extra notes, it's him.
Exactly.
But he
Yes.
didn't in this, so that shows, it must have been during the period in Liszt's life when he was...
Later, I think.
Yeah, like I was going to say, when he was about to become a priest,
Yeah.
and he was very pure about everything.
Yes, because we know also a lot of Liszt, he did a lot of transcriptions of like Don Giovanni or Faust, and I've played some of those, but those are like absolutely, I mean, there's flourishes everywhere. You can't play a melody without something, which is incredibly show-off.
The melody's just in the thumbs, and the other hand, the rest of the hand is doing
Yes.
this, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
But
this
not
one,
in
I
this
guess,
case.
I guess a symphony, there are enough voices already. So he
Sure.
really didn't have many opportunities to add notes. So I'm playing this one, and this symphony, I think, can also say a little bit about the orchestra, because for me, this is in no way some kind of replacement for the real orchestra version, and nothing can really replace a full orchestra. But for me, it's been so much fun to play it, because I do hear every orchestra voice as I'm playing it. I would imagine, there comes the oboe theme in the second movement, or in this wonderful cuckoo moment in the second movement where all the bird calls, like the quail, the cuckoo, the owl, and you can hear that so well in the orchestra. And so I'm really trying my best to mimic that. So it makes it
That's
fun
great.
for the pianist.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it's certainly his only programmatic symphony. Programmatic meaning that he's trying to express something from the real world, trying to describe something in the music. And
yes.
he did that really seldom. So the Pastoral Symphony is not only his first programmatic symphony, it's practically the first programmatic symphony.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there are moments like the very beginning is awakening of happy feelings upon arrival in the countryside. Second scene is the scene by the brook that has the bird calls, nightingale as well, I think,
Yeah.
and the cuckoo especially. Third movement is sort of a merry gathering of the country folk, and that devolves very quickly into a thunderstorm. Huge, like the biggest storm you can imagine because it's Beethoven. And then the rain dissipates, and then the fifth movement is Thanksgiving, a song of Thanksgiving after the storm has passed.
Exactly.
And it's just a lovely piece, and I can't wait to hear it played all by one person.
Yeah.
Claire Hunagci on the piano.
Thank you.
Claire, I think we'll end here for now. We want to leave the audience wanting more, and so we hope you'll join us. I know you'll join us. Of course you will. That's why you're watching this. You're going to join us Friday for the performance of the Emperor Concerto, as well as the 2 other pieces, Bach Brandenburg Concerto No. 3, and the L'Amant Anonyme, the Anonymous Lover Overture by Joseph Bologna, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and then, of course, the main event being the Emperor Concerto, and then the next night you get to hear these 2 pieces, the Waldstein Sonata and the Liszt transcription of the Beethoven Pastoral Symphony, right here from the block, and all of it from Muskegon, Michigan. Just incredible what the West Michigan Symphony is able to, and even during a lockdown or during a quarantine time in our history
Absolutely.
is able to put together.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming all the way from Germany for us.
It's my great pleasure and honor.
And,
Thank you.
and we'll see you on Friday and Saturday.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you soon.
Thanks, everybody.